Hello, everybody, and welcome to Prolific. Audience, let them know you're here. Go ahead. I am super excited to tell you about our wonderful guest who has accomplished a lot in a short period of time, pushes the boundaries, and is doing some incredible things. But before I do that, I'm going to I need to tell you about our amazing sponsors. Tonight, we're sponsored by two organizations. The first is TriArt Manufacturing. TriArt Manufacturing is a paint developer, producer, and distributor all over the world. Family-run business. They research and develop amazing oil, watercolor, acrylic, gouache, all the paints you could imagine, and then they have many more supplies. They recently moved to a massive new 160,000 square foot facility, which has going to change the game on everything they can provide to artists. So if you're looking for paint supplies, go to TriArt's website, triart.ca, tri-art.ca, and you can also look for retailers who, with their store locator, who may be near you, who carry their products. So let's give it up for TriArt. Our next sponsor is Kingston Frameworks and Kingston Frameworks Wholesale. If you're looking for high-end, amazing custom framing or custom giclée printing, look no further than Kingston Frameworks, who work with the local Kingston audience as well as worldwide with their online frame visualizer on kingstonframeworks.ca. They also have their wholesale program for artists, helping them create an income, any creative entrepreneur really, who would like to turn the images, the artwork that they work with into prints for sale, collectible items for their audience. So if it's not too much to ask, give it up for Kingston Frameworks. I have the best audience. All right, I think that's enough preamble. I'm so excited to share with you our show tonight. Please, audience here in person and also on the live stream, there is a Q&A session at the end for you to get your questions out to our guest, Joly, who I'm about to introduce. So Joly has had a storied career in film, marketing, and more, music. He'll tell you a little bit about that, but what inspired me to actually start this show was to see the way that he was pushing the boundaries in film in a small town that had no film industry. He's helping to develop one right here. That inspired me as a local Kingstonian who loves film, acting, everything like that. And it was one of the reasons, Jay is one of the reasons, that I wanted to start this show. So it is truly my honor to get him in here, and I'd like you all to give him a very warm welcome. Please and thank you. Good morning, Jay.
Thank you very much.
Oh, yes. Thank you.
Can I just make one small? I think we need to do between three palms. I think we have so much symmetry.
Well, it's like,
and as someone who enjoys the frame, I think.
Yeah, the palms are between us.
Yes,
three palms between two men.
Yeah, exactly.
The
so
new
I just,
show.
it feels more balanced.
It's okay to touch it. I think it's not going to hurt it. Ron, is it okay to touch plants? They like it, right?
As long as you're nice to them.
Yeah, as long as you're nice.
Yeah.
Well, it's great to have you here. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh, well, like when you told me you wanted to do this, and, in any big little city like Kingston, it's, it really does start at a grassroots level. So the fact that you took your initiative to put this together and, put a production value to the thing, I think it's great. And I'm happy to support it and do what I can.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
You coined the term hyperlocal, or I don't know if you coined it officially, but that's a big part of your operation. I'm kind of curious how you'd like to describe that to the audience.
Yeah, well, it's not really my term, but I thought what I liked it came out of agriculture and just and it was kind of when I first got to, so I guess I should, let me put a little context, a little bit of shape around, how we got here today. Like a lot of people over the last 3 years, I had been living in Toronto when the pandemic hit, living in like 700 square foot condo downtown. But my connection with Kingston came when I was at school here during the 90s, as I date myself here. And I had an incredible time in Kingston. It really got its hooks in me. And I always kind of knew that sometime in the future, it would draw me back. And, you know, part of the reason was I was a military brat. Like I moved around every 2 years. And Kingston was the first place that I ever spent more than 2 years at a time. So when I went to school, and then that became to what you alluded to earlier, which was, you know, I was going to school, but I was also playing, you know, I would say semi-professionally in a band. We were touring. We got to tour with some really great people, including, you know, the Tragically Hip and folks like that. We got a, you know, it was really a great experience. And it was around that time that I shot my first, like I'd always really enjoyed cinema. It was one of those things when you're growing up. You know, my first job was working as an usher in a Canadian, on a Canadian Army base in the former West Germany in Baden-Baden. My first job was at a movie theater. Cool. And I'd always, and when you move around a lot, why I'm a child of cinema still to this day is because what I loved about the movie theater experience is no matter where you went in the world, it never changed. You were always kind of home. It was always felt the same.
Absolutely.
And that's kind of what I enjoy about, you know, where all this comes from. But yeah, so, you know, and I'm making my first short film, you know, and a lot of the story of Branded to Film, which, you know, is what you kind of discussed earlier, really comes from my life experience and my story and pain points in my life that now I want to help other people, especially younger people, solve here in Kingston, which is...
What were some of those pain points?
Well, one of the things is I didn't necessarily want to leave Kingston, but I really got the film bug. I literally shot my first short film here in Kingston on 35 millimeter on celluloid. Mm-hmm. But I realized to continue my career, and that would have been 1998, you had to move to Toronto or Montreal or Vancouver.
Right.
But the key is that creative industry wasn't here. So, and still to this day, like when I moved back here, it still wasn't really here. You know, kids still, there was a, you know, youth, I shouldn't say kids, or people that just have, that want to be in that industry or have transferable skills to glom onto that industry. It really, you know, the kind of business that you were seeing here from film really was what I call location exploitation in a certain way, which is a great business. You know, people come here because they want to shoot in the prison or they want to shoot particular.
We got certain iconic locations that people can utilize.
Yeah, that are very unique to our city. But for me to make a business, like as someone who has created a few businesses over his life, is a business you have to be able to forecast revenue. You have to know, it has to be sustainable. It has to be recurring. You know, you have to have employees that earn, you know, a meaningful wage off it. These are all the things that make it important. So I realized there was an opportunity, and Kingston's very unique. Like, you know, like, I think it's one of the most uniquely positioned cities in North America, big little cities. Like, like it does feel like it could be the Austin of Canada, if anybody who's familiar with Austin in terms of its cultural scene, in terms of the fact of, you know, it's an institutional town, but it has this incredible flavor to it. And
Austin, Texas?
Yeah. Like,
really? Okay.
Well, when you think about it, 33% of Canadians live within 2.5 hours of Kingston. Right. It's very...
Yeah, you got Toronto, you got Montreal, Ottawa.
Yeah.
And then even below that, you got New York, which is massive population. So we're very central.
Yeah, and we built an incredible nighttime economy here. We've always punched above our weight when it comes to like music. You know, the food scene is incredible. And I think, but we aren't like we're a very unique, you know, people. We're a very unique kind of culture, a very unique sensibility. Like I would describe, we're not Toronto, we're not Montreal, we're not Ottawa. You know, if anything, we're kind of like the New Zealand of Ontario. We have our own shit going on.
Okay.
You know, we don't.
Does that mean like we could start doing the haka or something like that?
Well, we could.
Maybe we can come up with our own dance.
We could. Yeah.
The limestone.
Yeah. But it has, because, and, you know, even when I had a friend, a producer friend, who does a lot of stuff in Latin America. He was in town yesterday, and, you know, seeing, this was the first time he was in Kingston. And I've had this experience a few times, especially for people in my industry in film and television when they come here, because a lot of people, especially even in Ontario, a lot of people actually haven't really been to Kingston. They've driven past it, you know, and there is no, you know, I'll say this pleasantly, but there really isn't a pretty way to drive into Kingston. But if you can find your way past the golden arches at the 401, and you can find your way down, past Division and Princess, all of a sudden it's like, what is this place?
Yeah.
It's like, it's very different from the other stops along the 401. It's the mouth of the Thousand Islands. It's a very exotic place.
While we're on the topic of just what makes Kingston an interesting place to start a film industry, which we didn't really do a whole lot of service to really what Branded to Film is yet.
Oh, sure.
But one of the things that makes Kingston very interesting is all of the different locations that you have available to you. Like 10 minutes, you're in the country. You've got all these historical buildings. You've got great spaces like the one we're shooting in now where you shot your first movie. So why don't we dive a little bit into what Branded to Film's mission is right now and where you're taking this company that's building the industry right here?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Yeah, so there's a few questions there. So yeah, we're in James Media Space, and Lucas, the founder, very much a pioneer as well. This is actually the first commercial sound stage in Kingston right now.
Yeah,
like that, again, has employees, sustainable.
Big shout out to Jackson, who's helping us out right now from James Media.
Thank you. Thank you for
Jackson.
everything. And if you, fortunately, we can't pan these cameras around, but if you could, there's actually some artifacts because we shot all of Den Mother Crimson in this room. We never left this room other than to shoot a little scene out in, there's a boardroom over there that we used, but we never left this building, the key point to it. Cool. And so, and sometimes like everything in life is timing. When I, again, COVID, I was kind of, my girlfriend and I, again, living in a condo. It was a fairly miserable time for everybody, but especially in Toronto when you're like isolating at home, you're living and working, and we're two 6 feet tall people, and that space gets tight really quick. And so, so what we would do on the weekend to avoid like the opportunity for murder suicide to happen with us living there to kind of open the valve is we would pick these places. And I kind of said, hey, we should go to Kingston. I know a lot of people there and stuff like that. So we ended up, on just randomly on a weekend, just coming down to Kingston. I had a friend who said, hey, I'm doing something on Wolf Island. You should come check out Wolf Island. And even when I lived here in the 90s, we didn't, we knew Wolf Island, and it was very different. It was very locals only. Like we went there a few times, but there was no big sandy bay. It wasn't really like open like it is now, where they're really encouraging.
Yeah.
And I ended up going there, and I ended up, meeting, again, a musician back in the day that we knew each other, and stuff like that. But him and his partner were looking to buy the Wolf Island Hotel, and he needed a certain amount of money. And I said, well, I know a few people that might want to invest in something like this. Like he had a vision to turn it into a music destination, which I thought was really cool. Mm-hmm. And I really loved Marysville. I loved being on the water. I thought this is really cool. It's really unique.
Great place to live.
Yeah. So I asked him if he had a business plan. He said no. So I said, well, if you put me in this hotel for a month, I'll write your business plan.
Yeah, that's a good trade. I like that.
Yeah, and it worked out. So him and his partner, Chris Brown and his partner, Tom, operate the Wolf Island Hotel.
Yeah.
It has become a great music destination. We had some really great groups through there and continue to. And I think it will over time because of Kingston and Wolf Island's unique positioning. And remember, Wolf Island also, it's the biggest island in the Thousand Islands. Like it's the size of almost 2 Manhattans.
True.
And it's uniquely because we do have a ferry that goes to Cape Vincent, and it's like 5.5. So, and Chris's connection with New York. Anyway, I digress. But the point about it is I really fell in love with the island. I remember looking at Fabienne, who's my partner, and just kind of saying, you know what? Let's sell the condo. Like, I don't know if we're going to live here or not, but let's just keep our powder dry. Let's kind of figure it out. And then I ended up meeting someone who became our production manager, which is Grace over there. And, driving, I was exploring the island and ended up driving, this Highway 96 that kind of connects both the head and the foot of the island, and driving by it. And there's 2 gentlemen that I brought to help model the back end systems as part of the business plan for the hotel. They were from the hospitality business. And we were driving by, we saw these big poles and high tension wire. And it's like, that's a hop yard. It's like, that's cool. And we drove down the dirt road, and through that, we ended up creating a business. We heard Grace and John telling their story about, they moved here and very pioneering, did this, and looking for kind of customers, and a lot of that was...
You're talking about Carbon Brewing.
Yeah, Carbon
which
Brewing.
is a zero emission brewing company that you helped to get started, I guess.
Yeah, I helped. Yeah,
and they're continuing now.
Yeah, they're still around, and I guess served in a lot of bars downtown and across Ontario, and yeah, so I raised the money for that, and helped get it into on taps and stuff like that here. I'm shareholder, but it was during that time that I had that kind of eureka moment where I was just kind of like, wait a second, why is there no film industry here?
Right.
And so my mom lives in Victoria, BC. And so I'm very familiar with it, even when I was in Army Bratman. She's there now. And what I realized Kingston and Victoria, BC, if you really look at the two, they're kind of sister cities. They're kind of identical for, one has UBC, one has Queens, one has Royal Roads, one has RMC.
Right.
They're both institutional towns. They're both top 5 places to retire. They're both surrounded by water. But most importantly for me, they're both 2.5 hours from their biggest film and television production sector.
Right.
Except Victoria, it cost $1,000 on a truck to go over there.
Because they got a boat, you got a ferry.
But somehow they built a $100 million film industry there.
Yeah.
And Kingston, that not only has the busiest highway in North America, has a train, now has an extended runway, has the Montreal auto effect. We were doing like 3 to 5 million. And I was just like, how is that possible? And especially because I knew the pain point of being, again, that mid-level domestic producer in Toronto, like we can't afford to shoot in Toronto anymore. Like that greater Toronto Hamilton era, that $7 million person blob that continues to grow is quite unaffordable for not only for even just being an emerging technician or a person coming into the industry, but just to shoot, get permits, takes and it takes a lot just to move a crew around Toronto. Yeah. So, about 10 years ago, what a lot of us started to there was a fund up north, so we would go shoot in Sudbury or Sault Ste. Marie, but now that's really oversubscribed. So to me, when you're starting a business, if you can see that there's a pain point and you can see that there's a remedy, there's probably a business there. And Kingston, to me, is the next logical domestic production sector in Ontario. And because of all the reasons we described earlier for the unique qualities that it has and what it has. Like I said, I mentioned my good friend Rodrigo, who was here yesterday. And it was like, when you look at because it's such an old city, especially for English language Canada, the diversity in architecture from one building to this one's Spanish colonial, this one's from the 1980s, that one's from, it's just like the amount of looks you can have by just turning the camera and you're in a completely different place. And, you look at it, even RMC, one side's like very historical, the other side's very modern. Like the location diversity between Brockville and Belleville, that's if we build a catchment area around Kingston, is incredible.
That's awesome.
And I said, we have all the pieces. And then, and again, having even, several schools like St. Lawrence, we actually really leaned into St. Lawrence, the aesthetics, and want to continue to work with them and Les and stuff that's here today. But, and the other thing too, it's just a very livable city. So why Victoria? Yeah. So let's just go back to Victoria. Why did Victoria work? Well, and how did it work? Well, it was an interesting thing because I went back when I was doing the research to figure out how we can do the same thing here in Kingston. I said, well, when was Victoria making $3 to $5 million in revenue? And it turns out it was 2014.
Okay.
So
not that long ago.
I was like, okay, well, that's interesting. So in 2019, they were doing 20 million, and now they're doing 100 million. So that's like, there's some serious double-digit growth there. So what was that?
Yeah, that's awesome.
So so I talked to Kathleen, the film committee. They had a film commissioner, which was great, and that's a very important step. So and that's why I think one of the things that made it why I jokingly see, well, why didn't this happen 10 years ago? Well, it wasn't until about 3 years ago, that Megan and her staff in Kingston Tourism, started a film office, this is the only film office between Ottawa, Toronto, and Montreal. So that's that's a pretty bold statement for the city. It's like, let's really invest.
Focus on this.
Let's do something about this.
Yeah.
So that's an important piece. So that, and Megan Knott deserves full credit for financing that and getting that up and running.
Awesome.
And now making
someone who works within the city, or someone who just
she's the head of tourism. She's
head of tourism.
And she's done a lot now. It's like both film and music as of now has become like a priority sector for us, which is great.
I love to hear it, because really we have a talent per capita in this area that's probably one of the best.
Yeah. And I'm really, a big supporter of a wonderful festival that was started last year called Spring Reverb. This is the second year. We've doubled it year over year. And as an advisor and someone who helps bring the industry in, like, I really do think that this can be a South by Southwest style where we just light up like Princess from the hub all the way to the Wolf Island Hotel with dozens of bands every night.
That's awesome.
I really do think in 10 years we can be drawing 15 to 20,000 people to the city at this kind of critical point between, before the tourists come and convocation and all that stuff. It's a really great. So, and music's in my DNA, so I'm always going to be that guy.
I feel you there. Yeah.
So yeah, anyway, going back, sorry about that. So going back to
It's okay. We can go as many train rides as we want to.
Yeah. And feel free to cut me off too. That can be a little,
You're doing great.
So when I looked at Victoria, so I said, well, how did they go from 3 to 5, which is kind of us to this?
Yeah.
And it turned out it was actually very simple and totally logical. It was an individual. He was a producer in Vancouver. He had a series of small projects, like $1 million projects, and he couldn't find a crew, and it was too expensive to shoot. So he said, well, he had a connection, kind of like my connection with Kingston. He had a connection with Victoria, brought these productions, said, look, I'm looking to do this. And this kind of little magical thing happened, it's just like a little catalyst, a little spark, where some of the kids that would normally leave to go to the mainland to work in Vancouver, they stayed. They said, there was people.
I have opportunity here.
Yeah.
So
there was people in the trades, hair, makeup, carpentry, that had always been interested, that kind of glommed onto it, those transferable skills. But the third thing was there was a bunch of technicians, high-skilled technicians in Vancouver. They couldn't afford to buy a house in Vancouver. They were tired of the long commutes. Yeah. They were tired. They just wanted a more livable that came over to help train it all. Yeah. And the great thing about it really starts with the workers in a lot of ways. And that's, that was a point of Mother Crimson. That's the point of doing this slate of movies, is it acts as a revenue generating training platform. And that's what we... Yeah.
So your target is to do 10 movies over 5 years?
3 years.
So 3 years.
Yeah. So we wanted to do this, obviously everything. Yeah. You always have big aspirations. It's like 8 to 10. But the point is we wanted to start a pipeline of low budget genre movies. Okay. The genre movies, because like the Roger Corman model or anything else, it's a great place to build talent. Like if anybody knows who Roger Corman is, if you think of all your favorite directors from the 70s, James Cameron, what was his first movie?
Titanic.
Piranha 2
I don't know.
For Roger Corman.
I have to read up.
What was Martin Scorsese's first movie?
I don't know.
Boxcar Bertha for Roger Corman.
Right.
What was Francis Ford Coppola's first movie? Dementia 13 for Roger Corman.
You just started with the best. Yeah.
But what I'm saying is genre is always, like I always tell young filmmakers, make sure your first movie is a genre movie that makes some money, and then you can make movies for the rest of your life.
That's cool.
So genre movies is great. And it also teaches people real cinema, because you have to do it could be blood squibs or action or stuff where you have to do magical movie making.
What I appreciate with all of this is the ambitious strategic thinking that's gone into everything. It's like, yes, these are lofty targets, but also we're doing all of these things very intentionally, right? The movie choices, the choice to shoot hyperlocal, bringing in lots of local talent, giving those people experience so that they're better and better, more productive on set. To me, that all says you're basically building an ecosystem from scratch. It's like you've got an aquarium that's Kingston, and you're just putting in all the right things in order to get it to grow. Now, you're not doing this alone. You're doing this with a lot of support through community building, through financing. So I think a lot of that stuff mystifies people. I think when they hear $100 million budget, first of all, they're thinking, whoa, like that's crazy. That's so much money in the film industry, it's not even necessarily a huge drop in the bucket. But all of that comes back to like the financing, the producing, all of those sides. So what has been your approach? You know, it's one thing to have a vision, but how have you gotten people to believe in this, to join in? What's been the way that you've actually brought the people on board?
Well, another good question. I think some of it, luck and timing. I think Kingston was right for the idea.
Sure.
So maybe if I came here, 5 years ago, it might not have clicked with. It might still be there seem to be no points of friction when there people were, and especially people that are like stakeholders and decision makers were like, you know what, this is a really, and the thing is I reframed film and television for them too, because one of the things about it, and is film and television does a really kind of, to most people, does a really bad job of marketing the business part about it.
Okay.
When you think about films, when most people, even politicians particularly, they see red carpets, they see stars, they see Johnny Depp getting divorced from his, in court. Like it's all, it seems a bit like flaky and like
it just seems like a wild circus.
Yeah, it's like arty stuff. Yeah. It's like I don't get how this makes money. But we have to realize about film and television, it's one of our fastest growing manufacturing sectors in Ontario.
Yeah, see, that's the word right there. It's manufacturing. You wouldn't even think of that, but truly that's what's going on. You have to be professional, on time. You have to make everything count efficiently.
Yeah.
Go on, dig into that for me. Like, help us understand that a little better.
Well, it's like I use the analogy so people can understand. It's like when you're watching Star Trek, most of the action, all they do is they focus on those dozen people in the bridge.
Okay.
And, it's like, oh, well, that seems like all this is, but do you realize there's 300 people that they pass by in the halls, all below the deckers? Well, that's the film industry. Like, everybody focuses on this, but the thing is this, when you look at other manufacturing, like, if I said I was opening up a car plant here, people are like, oh, well, that's manufacturing jobs. That makes sense. It's like, yeah, but cars are just like a movie. There's of course there's a creative layer. There's writers, directors, producers, actors. There's, the stuff that's in front of the camera, or the stuff that's directing the stuff in front of the camera. But behind it, there's carpenters, porta potties, caterers, transport, like things that are just like, as I said, hair, makeup, wardrobe, things that are very much blue collar enterprise, creative blue collar enterprise, but, working with your hands kind of stuff.
Yep, absolutely.
So, when you look at a car, and you imagine like a place like Oshawa, well, you got to realize there was a lot of artists that designed that car. They designed the interior, designed the seat, they designed that hubcap, they designed the shape of the body, they designed those colors, that color scheme. But when we think about cars, we think about, those, at its peak was those 20, 30,000 auto workers in Oshawa churning out $5 billion in GDP every year for the province. And film is that it will be a $5 billion business by 2028 here in Ontario. And so I just kind of said, well, Kingston, where it's situated, and if we imagine that, say, whatever that number is, if it's 4 billion or 5 billion by 2028, there's no reason that Kingston can't take 1% to 2% of that. And that's $100 million business. If you kind of think about it that way, it's like, it's not such an unachievable goal.
And all of that funnels into the community, into the people.
Oh yeah.
Like, I think you're totally right. You see the few people on screen, all the cool special effects in a movie, and then the credits roll, and there's thousands of names.
Oh yeah.
And I remember when I got to be there for your first release of Den Mother Crimson, which was very much a genre film, sci-fi, and no one would have thought you could have shot a sci-fi here, right? But you did, and it was wonderful. It was all about AI going to Mars, some very interesting philosophical and psychological concepts. In that room was filled, was it 500, 800 people? I don't know. It was the Grand Theater.
It was nice. It was cozy.
It was very cozy.
It was cozy.
And what I got from that, this tremendous sense, especially when the credits rolled, but even beforehand and with all the speeches, there was very much a feeling from the audience of, we did this. I remember bumping into people and hearing them say things like, oh yeah, my wife's doing this part in the movie, or oh yeah, I did the lighting rigging and stuff. Like, have you ever done that before? No, but it worked. People learned things from that experience, and there was very much, we created something. And you know, I think you're pretty modest saying, you know, luck and circumstance. There's got to be some sets of skills or just activities that you need to put in place in order to properly bring people like that together. Like, what would you say has been? Is it sharing the vision? What is it that has brought people behind the whole initiative?
I would say, yeah, you know, of course there's a lot of brain power and calories spent to kind of come up. Like even Dead Mother Crimson, to your point, yes, I'm myself and my collaborators like Grace and George and all of the folks that were, you know, as we said, it's like, you know, and we just kind of put a date on the map. We said, we want to go to camera this day. And we said, we got to find a project, you know, we want to make it 100% Ontario. So part of it is also, you know, for me, for any business, if it's Carbon or helping the hotel or now doing this, it has to have a triple bottom line. So, and what's really important to me is starting any new business is, yes, it's important to let's make great movies. Let's make money. Nothing wrong with that. But how are we giving back? And that's the most important. That's one of the big chunks. It's like, well, if we can change the reality for the kids in this city and people who've always wanted to work in the city, that they can actually stay in the place they were born and work in an industry like this, that's going to be pretty cool. And most of the investors have put some seed money in, some of those, you know, cultural and business leaders, that was one of their main things. It's like, okay, well, this has meaning to it. It's not just, yeah, we're going to make movies and that's kind of cool. Which is kind of cool, by the way. It's super fun.
It is pretty cool.
But even
just on its own.
Yeah, when we made Dead Mother Crimson, it was very tactical because we said, okay, we set a metric for ourselves. We said we want to have 60% local hires, which had never been done. We wanted to make the first $1 million end-to-end movie that was developed, pre-produced, produced, and delivered from here at a professional quality.
Yes, and literally the first.
Which, you know, and you know, it's sad that it took to this long, but we did it. You know,
it's done.
So, and the reason we set it in one room is because we knew everybody coming in, a bunch of them, we needed to keep it. We didn't want to have location moves. We wanted them to come every day, and there was a baseline that they could learn from. So whatever they learned yesterday, the room's not going to change. And so every day they're learning within a static environment. There's the same amount of actors. There's the same amount of this. So the challenge was for us to come up with a compelling project that we could actually sell. And, you know, so we spent a lot of time on developing the script and stuff to get it to a practical point of view. Then, you know, nobody outside of Kingston's going to give a shit about. And why did they do it? You know, they could have gone outside the room.
It's got like a more broad appeal.
Yeah. Right? So by the end of it, people became, their skill level every day was working and professionally developing themselves and not in triage, running across town, trying to understand this new location, trying to understand different actors and trying to get new costumes. It's like the costume didn't change. This didn't change.
Right.
Let's keep this. Basically the movie happens in real time. And so that was absolutely tactical. And the next movie that we're planning and we're looking to go to camera, you know, at the end of this year, we've just said, okay, now we're going to take it out of the studio. Now we're going to take it on location, but we're only going to do 3 locations.
Right. So keep it simple. Just grow from there.
Yeah. And so it's just kind of like, again, just baby steps. Yeah. So that was kind of, so to your point, yes, that we just didn't pull a script out of with thin air and say, okay, let's do this one.
Yeah.
We said, no, it has to, because we have 2 goals. Like doing the slate of movies is a revenue generating training platform.
Right.
And our hope is, at the end of the 30 months, the 36 months, whatever it takes, and however movies, the nice thing about going back to back to back and being able, we had to do this first beta because I had to see, is this a crazy idea?
Crazy? Is this not going to work? I know that feeling.
Yeah. And, you know, and I'm a big believer in if you can see it, you can be it. And I think that's one of the other things that we had to do is we just had to show that it's kind of like, you know, I was a skateboarder when I was a kid and every trick seems impossible until you see someone else do it.
Right.
And now it's like, oh, I can do that. And so kind of demystify the process, kind of saying, yes, you can do that. And so in our next project, we want to be even more hyperlocal. And hyperlocal is the idea is like, how much can you use from the community? How much talent, how much resources?
Yeah.
And you saw in the credits, that's why we had 70 vendors or something like that. So what's great about film in general, it's kind of like the hospitality industry in a lot of ways, is, 95 cents or 97 cents of every dollar just goes back in the community. In fact, when you look at the direct, indirect, spin-off, and induced revenue, if the city invests like $1 into the film, they're getting like $5 to $7 back on some line categories back into the economy.
Yeah. And that's how it makes sense. And I think, from what I'm getting, there's a few things that you've done really well. And whether you'd say that was just you, I think you're a pretty modest guy, and I think you definitely give credit where credit's due. But there's a big vision, a clear, simple to understand vision. We can build the same type of industry that Victoria has. And then you made some really clear, timely goals. It was like, I want to be here. Like, we're going to camera by this point. And it sounds like from there, everything has just been very tactic oriented and understanding what's going to work while not losing sight of the creative vision. Like, I think what's so fascinating to me is no matter what creative field you're in, we all want to have some kind of creativity in our lives, generally speaking. Right? There's definitely lots of people who are creatives at heart, and they don't always know where to start. Do you have a vision yet? Do you have goals? Have you thought through the ways to get started and to start small, like you guys did with your first shooting in one room, basically? And then you're moving on to, a few more locations. Like, I just love how it seems obvious in a way when you hear it in retrospect. But for a lot of people, they're very mystified, I think, when they're trying to get their feet wet in a creative career. And I think the other thing, could you tell me, have you been just going to every group that would listen, or is there very certain people that you already knew would want to get on board? Like, you definitely had some relationships probably in place from previous parts of your career, which is great. Like, getting people to help out and to want to buy into a vision isn't always easy, but you've definitely succeeded in that. So is there any steps that sort of worked for you? Is it just lots of industry contacts, or?
Well, what was important for me for this company, yes, I've got a lot of, like, I've worked, I've shot movies in, Toronto, this movie, Wolf Cop, the movie I produced.
I so badly want to ask you about Wolf Cop.
But this was an example. This taught me a lot about hyperlocal. And like, we shot it in Saskatchewan and Regina, where there was no tax credits at the time. But it showed, what I saw was how much, even without tax credits, is the passion of local people working on their own IP, intellectual property, their own shit, basically. Right. And how that inspires people, and how they all kind of lift each other up creatively and say, well, wow, look at that creature makeup you did. Well, look at the costume you did, and look at the car that you just modified. And you could see the pride. And then when the movie was released and they put it, and we had a deal with Cineplex, people filled the cinema in not only Saskatoon, but they played for 3 weeks there. And then you realize hyperlocal's great, like you saw at the Grand Theater, is because if you can't play your movie for the town you live in and for them to love it, you don't actually have a business model. If you can start here, if I could make a movie, or we could make movies where we know that we have this baseline of fandom in our own town, and people who work on it, or people who heard about it, or people that just want to see what their friends and neighbors did on it,
right?
And get a sense of it before. And our big thing is in Kingston, we always want to show, like the one you saw at the Kingston Canadian Film Festival was a working. It wasn't the finished movie. Like it was like 60, but we wanted to, declare victory early and often. Just like, let's show what we're doing. Let's get people excited.
Yeah. Keep it transparent. Keep it moving.
Keep it moving. Yeah. Like, don't keep it a secret. Like, just tell people about what we're doing. Show people what we're doing. And but those simple actions of getting people together, and then serendipity happens, like, because you never know if people are like,
who's gonna come out of the woodwork.
Well, or even if I'm always amazed if a movie works at all. Like, when I get in the editing, I'm like, what is this? This is never gonna work. And you look at the shots and you're like, oh my god, and then you start putting music, but then you realize it's
artists who feel the same way about a canvas suddenly becoming something.
Yeah, well, and it's kind of because film is, I don't personally, yes, there's artistic qualities to film, but I don't look at like film like an art. I look at it like a craft, and it's a bunch of master crafts people coming around to create common, like, it's kind of very, in a way, very militaristic. It's very much like going to battle. Like, we've got a certain amount of shots we got to get off every day. And we know that the sun goes down at this time. So it's like, so we're all working in unison. at a cadence, like almost like, you know, a really good watch. It kind of all works together to get to that next beat. And so when a movie, when you're actually, because, you know, you're sitting there and you're really not, and, you know, we had you know, I sent it to Fantasia Frontière, which is it's out of Montreal, and they're one of the great genre festivals. And they saw the first, you know, they saw this rough cut that we'd shown at KCFF, and we ended up getting invited to present in Cannes, which was so it's like, oh, okay, maybe we can compete. Maybe we can actually make quality movies that people are, you know, that can compete at an international level. So that validated the model, like that, just that act of doing and being recognized and saying, oh, wait a second. And it's not just validation, but I think it's validation that we have everything we need in the city to be a great film and television hub, to be that next great hub. Yeah. And
it's not real until, I mean, it's real, you're doing it, but then you don't know how it's going to be received at that point.
Yeah. So that absolutely, you never know, you know, and it's not everyone's cup of tea. I don't think it's, you know, it's not going to win any awards, but that's the point.
I loved it.
It was just kind of, you know, the point was just to make it, to say like, now we've got, that's the first step. And you don't have to boil the ocean. You just have to, it's just a series of small steps that when you look back, it seems it's a lot of work.
I want to see the full edit. Like I only got to see a rough cut. I want to see the full edit.
Yeah. So, so yes, I would too. Yeah. Yes. No, we do have, we just, after Con, it's, you know, one of those things is,
you let me know when it's ready.
Yeah.
Well, you know, wonderful stuff. I mean, really I just want to draw out one thing you were touching on that I think is so important. I mean, there are a lot of creative pursuits in life and creative folks who need to get on board with the concept of being productive in their creative pursuit. Like it's not about waiting for inspiration to strike necessarily. And I think it really shows. You were saying it's not an art, it's a craft. It's militaristic. It's, you know, there's a certain element of you just get up and go to work every day. And it can be hard when you're on your own. Let's say you're an artist in a studio or a musician with your guitar or something like that. But you can't get away with that in film too well, I don't think. Or you're definitely never going to get to the visions that you want to achieve that way. And I just love that basically we can take that lesson no matter what the art, no matter what the craft is in your creative field and say, okay, what am I going to do to get in the studio today? What am I going to do to push this project forward today? No matter how you're feeling, anything like that. I'd love to. I think we're probably closing in on time right now. Perfect. Would you tell us about Wolf Cop?
Well,
Wolf Cop, as far as I know, is a cult following film. Yeah. It's Jay Joly and his team's behind it.
It was, a company in Vancouver. And so part of my life is I've always, because of the, you know, the kindness that I experienced in music, especially, you know, being able to tour with bands when, you know, we were at the time in Kingston, we were, you know, like nobody knew who we were. We were a little 3-piece band called the Van Allen Belt. And, you know, just, again, Johnny from The Hip just saw us playing in this little bar. I think it was a Queen's Head at the time. I can't remember, but said, hey, you're good enough to play with us. And kind of, and so part of my, when you look at the stuff I've done, like, so in Vancouver, I had a company called the Coup Company that's, and we, you know, we did it was a digital agency, but we did a lot of really, one of the things that I'm most proud of is we developed this platform called Story Hive, where we, TELUS had this fund of money and they didn't know how to deploy it. So we figured out how to put together a platform that filmmakers from Alberta and BC could apply. They did some videos, and you know, to date, I think it's over $10 million has been deployed to first-time filmmakers. It's started a whole bunch of careers. It's had a meaningful impact
on culture.
And changed people's lives. And I think being able to facilitate that, and then we've done another one with TELUS. It was so successful, and this one's still, you know, again, stories for caregivers, where we give filmmakers money to tell stories about the people that are affected when your loved one gets really, really sick, because often that's like a hand grenade that goes off in your life. And a lot of people as caregivers don't get a lot of, so it helps kind of tell stories about how caregivers coped when, you know, their their spouse developed cancer, and these really heavy things. But we did it through media, but also it helped tell stories through a visual medium. And then through that, I realized there was an opportunity. I realized across Canada, there was probably all these filmmakers in all these places that were, not in Toronto or not in Vancouver, or not in Montreal. The flyover part of the country, kind of like the drive-by part of the 401 that we find ourselves in. And I said, well, I think there's a way that we can surface. Let's try and find that next great filmmaker in Canada. And this would have been like 2013, 2014, so a little while ago. And kind of came up with a concept based on the learnings that we had been doing. And, I also designed craft hockeyville back in the day. Seeing that on Wolf Island, I designed it the year after they did the Wolf Island got their arena, which was fun. But it was, so we partnered with Cineplex. We put up $1 million to find that next great filmmaker. And the thing is, all they had to do was come to our platform. And every week we would give them a little mission that they would have to answer with like a 1-minute video, and they'd have to get their friends to kind of like share and this and all this kind of stuff. And
see which one gets the support.
Yeah. And then so, we started like 100+ people applied the first year. And then we would whittle that down to the top 10. Those 10, we would option their picture. And then the top 5, we would bring to the Banff World Media Festival. On stage. They would pitch live in front of industry decision makers, including myself. And one of them would get that. We would do that deal flow right on stage. So, and this project out of Saskatchewan, Wolf Cop, like they had, from our platform, we could see they had fans in South Africa. They had blogs being written in Japan. Like they had really not only gone, and their community was like, they were like, people in the community were putting billboards up, because every 2 weeks we'd have a voting round where you get like, people would have to vote to say who gets to stay in, and it slowly called down. So there was a gamified aspect to it.
Definitely.
But out of that, like we found Wolf Cop, and it kind of became a global hit. We made a second one, we made action figures, we made this. And what it told me was, then we did another one. We did one called Comedy Coup for the CBC, where we were looking for kind of that next Kids in the Hall. We did a pilot for them. And but what all of those things informed me was, there is something to be said about, to democratize things that normally had gatekeepers, to find new disruptive ways to get voices heard in places that you wouldn't think even have a film industry,
right?
Or you don't think of, because we're so, especially if you're in English language Canada, Toronto, it's like, if you dropped a bomb at one place in Toronto, you would take out most of English language media, like it's all within a kilometer. Like,
right. It's very compressed.
It's very there's a lot that's there. It's not saying that there's not stuff spread out, but not at there's very few places in the world where, even in the States, you got New York, you got, LA, now you got Georgia. It's kind of like
the hub
spread
effect, I guess, right? Like Silicon Valley. There's that whole proximity effect, but it doesn't have to be that way. Well, today with the internet, like we've blown up the gates in so many ways.
Well, one of the
anyone can just start a show.
Yeah. Well, when I moved from, so I mentioned, I'm at that age. So when I started in the business, and my first film was shot on celluloid, and one of the reasons you had to go to Toronto in like 99 is because we were still shooting on film. So that's where the labs were. So there was actually a technical necessity, because of film, as you know, it's 24 frames, it's thousands of feet. I think that's how they're advertising Oppenheimer right now. It's like 11 kilometers of film, 600 pounds.
Right.
All right.
Just stupid human feats of excess.
Oh no, but if you ever, if you ever worked in a movie theater when it was celluloid, it was like cans. They were heavy. Like it weighs a lot. When it was all analog. So when I moved there and I worked on a show, and that's where I met my partner George Asmakopoulos, and we were both working on this show that called Queer as Folk, and we started on Super 16, and in that show, by like the second or third, we watched it go to HD when Showtime just said everything's got to be HD, and all of a sudden we had these huge HD cameras, and we're like, what is this?
Right.
So to your point, like technology has changed so much that there's no reason that Kingston has no excuse. There's no barriers. Like, look at this place. Like, look at all the technology around us. Like, those cameras are more sophisticated than a 16mm camera. and the image quality is much better.
Right.
And now you have like an editing system that comes with your computing. Like when I started, like even a nonlinear editing, like back in those, that was like 200 grand to get one of those, like back in the, the early aughts. It wasn't a cheap enterprise. So, and what you're seeing now is even faster. Like, and that's where I really think that Kingston has an advantage, because I don't necessarily believe, especially when you look at stuff like generative AI, you look at stuff like virtual production, you look at these very sophisticated, affordable tools. I don't know if the future is big boxes, lots of labor in expensive cities like Toronto. I think the future could be smaller studios that are more tech-enabled, greener, with hyper-local, the people around it, creating incredible stuff in more livable places like this. I think, that if the secret gets out on places like this, that it's easy for me to see when I bring a guy like Rodrigo or bring one of our new partners, Neil, or, it was interesting about, I've probably mentioned this a few times, but when we were shooting Dead Mother Crimson, realized 20% of the 20% was like the actors, most of which, other than one we brought from Toronto, and then the rest was crew, like technical key positions, we call them, that we brought to help train our locals. But
so you brought in some pros so that the locals could really.
So we had, so they could learn under them.
That's how you develop the talent.
But most of those, what was hilarious, and most of them had never been to Kingston before. So, and because we were shooting out here in West Kingston, that's very, this looks like a lot of places in Ontario, a lot of suburbs kind of thing. So they came here and we were, we had them, and we used hotels very close to here so we could run them back and forth, especially the actors, so they could have literally their room was their hotel that was just up the road.
Cool.
But when they came here, like anybody that comes to a new city, the first night they would go like, "Is there any good place to eat in this town?" And I'd be like, "Yeah, man." And I'd open up my hand and I'd send them down to the water. And then the next day they'd be like, "How much your house is here?" Because there is something, because there is a superpower, and you kind of have to come here, and you kind of have to, like, you realize when you're down, and there's more, I think there's more like restaurants per capita than any city in Ontario.
That's us. That's the city.
So it's just like, oh my God, you got a food scene, you got a music scene. It's this beautiful architecture. You're on the water. Like, I couldn't be happier. Like where I'm on Wolf Island, like, it's like I get to look out over Confederation Basin every night.
Really good custom framer.
Yes. Well, and I gotta, we need to talk.
We can talk. Listen,
did I nail it all?
You nailed it all.
Okay.
It has been wonderful. Should we go to Q&A?
It's your show, man.
All right, let's do it.
I'm just a guest.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for telling me your story.
Okay.
Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you.
Awesome. Does anybody have anything? I don't know if anything's popped up on the chat. You can let me know there, Jackson. Does anyone have any questions that they'd like to submit to Jay? You can speak. It will pick you up. You don't have to get on camera or anything. But if you have any questions, feel free. This is the time. It could be for either of us. Just creative process, story, curiosity. And if no worries. No pressure at all.
That's very, so we have a few projects, but there's one that we really are excited about. So George is breaking it down. George Asmakopoulos, who's one of the co-founders. This one's a very different, it's more akin to this. It's it is a horror movie. So I will say that it is a kind of a twist on a kind of a cabin in the woods movie. It's very loud. It's going to be very rock and roll, which I kind of like. It's got a very strong music presence. And what we're looking to do with this one, the metrics we've set is we want to get up to like 70-80% local. And what we really failed last time was, in my opinion, when we say failed, a metric we couldn't achieve is we need to, because there's a lot of actors. Is there actors here? Anyway, but there is a lot of actors in this town. But one of the things we realized is there's stage actors. Stage and acting for camera is two very different art forms. So what we want to do with this one is George and I, we haven't figured out all the details. So, don't quiz me on it as an actor. But we're going to have an open call for this one. So we're going to say anybody in Kingston. Like we're going to do it kind of like old school, like Italian neorealism, where you come to a town and it's like, okay, well, anybody can come. We're just going to set up shop. Anybody can come. We're obviously going to go. We're going to find. We've already actually identified a local gentleman who has really great experience in film and television, and he's an acting teacher. And kind of give him the script so actors that are interested, he can, help them own their craft from theater to really. Because my thing in life is, if you can manage people's expectation and set them up for success, life is good.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
I got to one of his classes recently, actually.
And and you wanted?
Yeah, it was wonderful.
There you go.
Yeah, I'm excited. I got a monologue I'm working on. Just stuff to do for fun, really, right now. But who knows?
Yeah,
might be in a movie.
Yeah, so we're gonna hopefully
in my hometown.
Yeah, yeah, and so that's one of the things that I think that we need to work harder on as a company is now in the behind the scenes. We know that we can do this. Now we got to figure out how to bring, more. If like I said, what I've always said about, I'm going to say this, and I've said it probably enough out there in the ether of press, as a lot of these tidbits I've dropped tonight. But one of the things that, if you look at a movie, like to me, Canada has never made a Mad Max. Everyone's familiar with Mad Max. So I'll tell you a little story about Mad Max. So George Miller, this is 79, 80. He was a medical doctor at the time. And he, on the weekends, he started shooting in his backyard or, in his region, this post-apocalyptic idea he had. And, it was about a $300,000 at the time budget, privately financed, launched the career of Mel Gibson, for better or worse. I prefer to think of the good times in Mel Gibson's life.
He's got some great ones.
Yeah, and
take the good with the bad.
No, I'd say no. He's like I said, he very formative movies I watched of his growing up, including Mad Max. So, and when you think about Mad Max, and when you think about Australia, and you think about postal, Mad Max is an Australian movie. There's no doubt about it. Like everything about it, they didn't hide the accents. They didn't hide there it is.
Yeah,
and now
the original is.
Well, even the second, the first couple, the Road Warrior, the first few, and then, obviously you get to Beyond Thunderdome and that kind of stuff.
It kind of Americanized at that point.
Well, but there's still a lot of accents in it.
It's true. It's true.
And it wasn't really until Fury Road that now it's all, mostly Americans. But there's still a smattering of Australians in the back in key roles. But you still, as a university created it, it's a very Australian universe.
Right. Sure. Yeah.
And now, but what was interesting to me is, again, it created this original piece of intellectual property, this little independent genre film, kind of like what we did in this room. Not that what we're doing is anything close to that. But now they're at episode, which chapter is 6 or 7, they're doing Furiosa. So they went from a $300,000 budget to now it's closer with marketing, it's $300 million.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
And I'm but that's what genre movies can do, because genre movies travel.
That's really cool.
So when people kind of and one of my issues with Canada, and especially, how our cultural funding is, we've really lost sight of the importance of, of genre, of how, when you look at even the tax shelter era in Canada, which was this really short period where Canada allowed private investors to invest in Canadian films. Where you could write off 100% of your investment. And sure, it opened up there was people that took advantage of it. But in that short period between 1974 and early 80s, it wasn't even a decade until they got rid of it. They went from 4 movies in 1974 till in 1979, they made 77 movies in 1 year. Wow. And remember that year, Hollywood only made 98.
Wow.
So, but what that did for Toronto, it bought all the equipment, trained all of the crews, basically laid the groundwork.
So a very good investment.
Yeah. And all the movies, most of them were nasty little genre films. They launched the careers of Ivan Reitman, launched the careers of, Don Carmody, Cronenberg. You really look at what was going on there. And it was a really important time. And unfortunately, the decision makers, And the kind of cultural stakeholders decided, even, if you go back at that time, like Cronenberg was eviscerated, one of our great, in terms of a movie that he made. In Saturday Night Live, you go back and look at what Robin Fulford wrote about him back in the day, and how it's come to be one of our great filmmakers,
our heroes. Yeah.
But so part of me, and because there was this feeling, and now when we really look at like kind of the films and what's kind of financed, in my opinion, it's like there's just not enough genre products. Yeah, there's a lot of coming of age. There's a lot of these really dark, really dramas about very, very serious things. You would think we're kind of a very morose people if you just watch some of the cinema that we have. But Canadians are funny, fucked up people. And the stuff that really kind of like, when you look at the stuff that really travel.
That's a secret. We don't tell the rest of the world.
I know, but it's... Well, I think post-COVID, it's a different world now. Like one of the things that's changed fundamentally is this: people don't have to work where they live anymore. The idea of working from home, it could be, you could be 10 minutes from where your old office was, or it could be 10 hours, and you can still get a full day's of work in. So I think part of it is when I was a young man, when I started in the industry, when you think about 1999, it was the exchange rate was, we were like 66 cents on the dollar. Like films and television were coming up here like mad. They were just looking for people with half a brain and a warm body and said, hey, you want to work in film? Let's get on here. So there was an opportunity for me. And this would be along, and I've said this before, but when I started in Toronto was a very different place. Like it was the 90s and 2000 was kind of that last kind of, in my opinion, and I'll get in trouble from somebody, but it was a kind of golden era. Like, I was, working in film. I could work as many hours as I wanted. There was so much work. I was getting paid between like $18 and $23 an hour. I had a 2-bedroom apartment at Queen and Euclid that was $675. I had a $50 pager. I could take the TTC anywhere, plus a short cab ride to get to most places I had to shoot. Now look at today. If the J. Joly of today went to Toronto, I'd have a $2,000 basement apartment. I'd have a $400 cell phone bill. I would often, depending where these studios are, some are out in Oakville, some are out, I would sometimes have to spend $150 a day on Uber just to kind of get to work to start that entry-level job. And I make only $2 more than I did in 1999. So to me, that yes, part of it is me coming back. And of course, this was a very formative time. And I had a wonderful time here. And I didn't, coming back, I got, of course, there's the nostalgia and they're seeing old faces and kind of visiting places that haven't changed and other new things that have changed and all the wonder that comes with that. But, when I came here also, and just falling in love with the new part that I really, in the 90s, no one really, you didn't go to Big Sandy Bay. Wolf Island was kind of like this place where it kind of felt like locals only at the time. But it's very different now. And especially now with the new ferry, we won't go into that. That's a whole other hour we don't need to go into. But I believe that Greater Kingston is at an inflection point. And it's at that point where everything, it's kind of like a Matthew McConaugheyism. It's all kind of green lights. Everybody's kind of somehow aligned to kind of push the city to where it's always kind of meant to be over the last 20 years. Like everybody's pulling in the same direction. And
we need to a degree. It's growing rapidly. There's expected like 5% growth rate a year for the next 5 to 10 years, and Canada's growing at like 0.9 or something like that in terms of total growth. So we are growing quite rapidly compared.
Yeah, and Canada's going to, again, we just surpassed 40 million people. We're going to be bringing in, 500,000 new immigrants a year.
Okay.
When I look out, again, when I make the comparison to Victoria, like from my vantage point, looking out my back door on Wolf Island, when I moved here, there wasn't any cranes in the sky. Now there's 4 cranes in the sky. Yeah. Now there's, condos going in. That was Victoria 8 to 10 years ago.
Right.
Like the density is coming.
Sorry.
Did I not answer your question?
No, you did, but okay, so in that's what brought you back. But now, are there people in your industry that you are like longing to say, hey, this is where you want to come? Because there are ones that you're going to have others come here to make your industry explode. So like, do you have specific friends, people, hopes, dreams, aspirations that you want to see come? Like people specifically or businesses that you want to see come to add to this community to make the community itself get bigger?
Yeah, if I had the funding today, I'd have 12 people here tomorrow. They'd have already said that they would move here if we had a pipeline of work for them. So
Pipeline of work.
Yeah,
that's what it's all about.
Well, you got to pay the rent.
No, of course. That's what you need. Like you need to be able to finish a job and go to the next job. Right?
Everybody I brought here, they're like, once we get into that, like back to back, and and again, we're in a big fundraising. We've managed to raise a second fund. Now we're looking at real estate to build sound stages. So we're going to be my team is working on building a big round of financing. They both will help finance the slate that we're proposing, this revenue generating training platform, and we'll also build the first sound stage, like professional sound stage and support buildings. So we're currently, looking at land, and, our thing is to do that in parallel. So if we raise this money, we can just basically start sprinting. So while to build a building of that nature is, like three years it'll take to build, like call it 30 to 36 months. But in that time, in parallel, we're going to build 2 crews in every category. So the day that opens, we will be in a great position to now start onboarding more and more. And what's great about once you start that, it's not necessarily where productions, if it's a service production or we're domestic producers. 3 years is a really interesting for where we are now, because 3 years also represents not only for us to become like almost like a full stack. That means everything. You can come here full stack. It's 100% local. Of course, you're going to always bring some actors in, but it also represents something else that's going on that's really interesting in Canada, which is, Bill C-11 recently got royal assent. And I'm not sure, just so everyone knows what Bill C-11 is, it's kind of like what, quote unquote, is called the Netflix tax, where the CRTC, the Canadian Radio Television Commission, every, couple decades opens up the books and really kind of tries to catch up media with the state of technology. Mm-hmm. And, this has happened in a bunch of countries around the world, where when you look at Ontario, 60% of Ontarians have a Netflix account. And if you see where in Canada, where we get our money from, like for Canadian Media Fund or Telefilm, it comes from our broadcasters. They have to pay a certain amount of the profits back into it that's redistributed to filmmakers and television producers and documentarians, etc. And what they realize is like, well, Amazon, Prime, these guys aren't contributing to this. So they rewrote it. So what that means is it's going to take probably about 3 years for them to figure out how to start deploying that capital. But, and how much that capital will be is, it's a matter of debate, but conservatively, it's about double what we have now. So what that means is Kingston should be prepared to take on that business, to be that next domestic production sector. And what I'm really looking at, it's like, I don't necessarily, yes, eventually the big service productions will come. Like, when you realize, if anybody has any, you wonder how big a production is. So, as I don't know if I mentioned, but, an episode of Star Trek is $20 million an episode, just to give you an idea of scale. We're not going to be able to do that. That's not what the point of this is. But we will be able to serve as a place for domestic Ontario, maybe Canadian production. Because right now, even producer friends of mine are not only can't afford to shoot in Ontario or can't go up north, they're actually going to places like Halifax and Manitoba to shoot because they can't find, they can't make it work here. And that's really sad that, so my thing is, well, if there's all these Ontario producers leaving, again, solve a pain point, create a remedy. And so the business is based on, forecasting, the disruption we're seeing, forecasting, things like I mentioned that you don't necessarily, the technology has changed. We don't have to, necessarily be in that cluster effect of Toronto. The technology has been democratized. There's a lot of things that tell me my best guess and the people that have invested, including the city, in terms of their support and more, that said, you know what, there's enough things here that we got to at least try. You know, we got to at least, we'll get it at least half right, in my opinion. So again, long answer to a very short question. I hope I got it for you, but
you are a wealth of knowledge.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. And thank you for joining us. I think we should probably wrap it up there.
Sure.
We're still figuring out how to do that well, but yeah, wow. I feel like I've learned a ton about the film industry, how you're going about building this huge project. You've been more than generous with the information and your time. So I just really appreciate everything you've brought here today. Can we give him a big round of applause?
Thank you.
And
well, we are raising money, so I have to do this all the time.
Yeah, exactly. Hey. And so are we for KCAD, who I did not mention yet, for Kingston Community Arts and Design, an organization run by Karen Peppercorn, who is bringing arts and accessibility to all. You can get $15 1-hour lessons. You can see all kinds of up and coming artists, where it's not unlike getting people their start in the film industry or other industries. So proceeds of the show go to that. And I want to thank you all for supporting it. Our next show, August 17th, we have a very exciting guest that I will not yet firmly announce, but we have a very exciting guest, and it's going to be a wonderful show. Just got to make sure it all lines up at 5 p.m. on Thursday, August 17th. Until that time, be bold, be creative, be prolific. Thank you very much.